Yoda was the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, one of the wisest and most powerful Jedi of all time. The beneficiary of many long centuries of accumulated knowledge and experience, Yoda was one of the Order's greatest members in many different ways, one of which was combat skill. While Mace Windu was more commonly recognized as the greatest lightsaber duelist in the Order, Yoda was still renowned as an unbeatable combatant, extraordinarily powerful in a fight. But what exactly made Yoda such a devastating fighter? In this video, we'll be examining that question.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Before we begin, we're going to quickly discuss our sources. We're going to be drawing on 4 Legends books for today's video. R.A. Salvatore's novelization of Attack of the Clones, Matthew Stover's novelization of Revenge of the Sith, Yoda Dark Rendezvous by Sean Stewart, and the source book The Jedi Path, written by Daniel Wallace. As always, we encourage you to buy these books and support their authors, and with that out of the way, let's begin. We've done a character analysis of Yoda before, focusing on his wisdom, his insights into life and the Force, and how he was a more complex person than he was often given credit for. Yoda's wisdom was what he was known best for. After all, he spent most of his time holed up in the Jedi Temple, teaching initiatives, weighing in on council decisions, and giving aid and advice to any who asked for it. Even on those rare occasions when Yoda left the Jedi Temple, his missions rarely turned violent, even during the Clone Wars. Yoda was a Jedi consular, after all, preferring to resolve situations through diplomacy and peaceful settlement, if at all possible. But Yoda could fight too. While many Jedi consulars neglected lightsaber techniques, Yoda was a skilled duelist, and few could withstand him in combat. With that said, demonstrations of his combat prowess were as rare as they were stunning, and this is the first part of what made Yoda such a fearsome combatant. The Jedi taught that it was always best to avoid violence if ever possible, although they often disagreed on how far to go with this. Your average Jedi Guardian took this principle more or less under advisement, often drawing their lightsabers and charging into fights after the bare minimum of attempts to reach a peaceful resolution. But consulars could be more committed to ending things peacefully, and Yoda was no exception. He keenly valued all life, even the lives of his enemies, and he was always persistent in his attempts to preserve it, even when defeating an opponent would be easier. Yoda's wisdom gave him a gift for finding these sorts of resolutions. He had a knack for understanding the concerns and positions of others, for sensing their feelings and understanding how best to work around them. The Force helped, of course. Being able to sense one's opponent's thoughts and deepest motivations made it easier to come to a settlement. But Yoda also had ordinary intuition about these things, which sometimes even caught Force sensitives off guard. That was why Yoda held the position of Grand Master, as he once reminded scouts in Yoda Dark Rendezvous. Yoda scrambled up onto the bed and sat beside her, letting his little legs dangle in space. His ears perked. "Secret, shall I tell you?" He leaned in close, so close she could feel his whiskers rasping against her face. "Grand Master of the Jedi Order, am I?" he said loudly right in her ear. "Won this job in a raffle I did, think you?" He snuffed and waved his stubby fingers in the air. How did you know, Master Yoda?" he said mincingly, followed by another snort. "Master Yoda knows these things. His job it is." This intuition was the result of centuries of experience in dealing with others and finding peaceful resolutions to conflict. By the time of the Clone Wars, Yoda had been around for nearly 900 years, and he'd been a Jedi Master for nearly 800 years. No Jedi had such a vast wealth of experience in dealing with others as Yoda did. It helped that Yoda's age also gave him the gift of patience, and that he was also good at being gentle, fatherly, and understanding with others, even beings like Dooku, who had betrayed him and inflicted unfathomable harm upon the galaxy. All of this made Yoda an exemplary Jedi Master, and from a Jedi perspective, it also made him an ideal Jedi combatant. Yoda could stop wars, reconcile with bitter enemies, and change the course of history. Not with a lightsaber, but with simple compassion, intuition, and openness. Those kinds of victories were the greatest of all, the ones for which no one needed to die or even be hurt, the ones that all parties were strengthened by. Yoda would have preferred it if these were the only types of battles he ever had to fight, but unfortunately, this wasn't the case. Sometimes, even Yoda was left with no choice but to draw his lightsaber, and when Yoda's lightsaber came out, he was all but unstoppable. A large part of that was due to Yoda's mastery of one of the Jedi Order's most ferocious forms of lightsaber combat, Form 4, or Ataru. Also known as the aggression form or the way of the Hawkbat, Ataru was overwhelmingly offensive, something that sharply contrasted with Yoda's usual approach to conflict. It encouraged practitioners to fight aggressively, to strike from as many angles as possible, and to quickly wear an opponent out, typically through sheer momentum. In his day, Yoda was the unrivaled master of Ataru, and no Form 4 stylist before or after could surpass his technique. Ataru's focus was on speed and mobility. The form emphasized constant movement of the body, often through force-assisted acrobatics. Ataru practitioners struck fast and were always on the move, keeping their opponents constantly off balance by coming at them from new angles with every attack. The basics of most Ataru moves was rotation, which Form 4 users used to build up momentum. An Ataru duelist could rotate along 3 axes, and these 3 kinds of movement were known as Jangsuma, or spinning, Tonsuma, or somersaults, and Ensuma, or cartwheels. In combination with each other, as well as with jumps, charges, rolls, and dodges, these 3 moves kept the Ataru user in constant motion, and they kept that movement dynamic and unpredictable. These acrobatics were almost always force-assisted, and Ataru masters transitioned between them smoothly so that each blended into the next. Ataru users combined this constant motion with fast-paced lightsaber strikes, applying constant pressure from a variety of angles. The rapid strikes of an Ataru user usually didn't have too much strength behind them, but they were numerous, and the form's constant movement ensured that they came from every conceivable angle. The same force techniques that allowed Ataru users to perform their acrobatics also allowed them to strike more quickly than they otherwise could, amplifying this effect. Form 4 applied constant, overwhelming pressure, rapidly wearing down the defenses and the wills of the user's opponent. Like all forms of lightsaber combat, Ataru was designed to be enhanced through the Force. While most forms emphasized relying on the Force for inner calm or focus, however, Ataru drew on the Force in more practical ways, using it to enhance the duelist's physical capabilities. Techniques like Force Speed, Force Jump, and Force Valor meshed well with Ataru, and the use of the Force was pretty much required to perform some of the form's acrobatics. Simpler, more passive Force techniques could be used to make Ataru users slightly faster, stronger, and more agile. Most importantly, however, Ataru practitioners used the Force to bolster their stamina and stave off fatigue. As a consequence, while the wild movement of Ataru would quickly tire out most ordinary beings, trained Jedi could persist with the form for far longer. Ataru was known as the aggression form, and this name was well earned. Form 4 users were constantly on the offensive, as the form's preferred tactic of overwhelming an opponent required. While Ataru wasn't completely without defensive utility, it did neglect defense to a degree, encouraging users to avoid the attacks of an opponent rather than deflect them. For offensive purposes, Ataru emphasized maneuvers like the Hawkbat swoop, wherein the practitioner would deliver a quick but hard strike from above before retreating. These sorts of hit-and-run tactics played to the form's strength, but when they weren't enough, Ataru had plenty of other aggressive maneuvers to keep the offensive going. Ataru's approach to combat was devastating in certain situations, but it also had weaknesses that only the greatest of Ataru masters could overcome. For starters, its focus on overwhelming the enemy generally only worked against a single opponent. If a Jedi was outnumbered, Ataru usually wasn't a very good choice. Its reliant on constant movement and attacking from multiple angles meant that it worked best out in the open, and even Ataru masters could struggle when fighting in tight spaces. In addition, the constant acrobatics and heavy force use of Ataru was exhausting. As a consequence, the most reliable way to defeat an Ataru user was to draw out the fight until they were fatigued and vulnerable. These last two weaknesses ultimately proved fatal for Ataru Master Qui-Gon Jinn. But Ataru also had strengths, the greatest of which was flexibility. While many other forms of lightsaber combat emphasized careful footwork and straightforward movements, Form 4 encouraged practitioners to be unpredictable and chaotic. This allowed it to adapt to a variety of conditions, and it also allowed the user to easily offset physical limitations. On paper, Yoda's use of Ataru might seem like an odd choice. Ataru was focused on speed, mobility, and aggressively covering a variety of angles at once, which generally aren't strengths of the old and small. But the Force was a powerful ally, and Yoda was able to use his strong connection to the Force to give him the agility needed to master Ataru. Thanks to the Force, not only did the weaknesses of advanced age and small stature not inhibit Yoda's use of Form 4, but Ataru actually helped him offset those weaknesses entirely. While the contained, conservative movements of many other forms would have left Yoda at a bit of a disadvantage due to his small size, the acrobatics of Ataru allowed him to overcome much larger beings in lightsaber duels, transforming the elderly Jedi Master into a deadly blur of green. But while Yoda's use of Ataru to offset his physical limitations is easy enough to understand, Ataru's aggressive nature still stood in contrast to just about every other trait the Grand Master had. Yoda abhorred violence, even if he recognized that it was often necessary, and he greatly favored diplomacy and peaceful resolutions. Such an attitude seems like it would fit a more defensive and measured form better than Ataru. Yoda himself once even said that Jedi use the Force for knowledge or defense, never for attack, and yet his preferred combat style used the Force more offensively than any other, even surpassing Form 7. This seeming contradiction isn't just limited to Yoda either. The Jedi Order as a whole cautioned against aggression, yet they had a whole style of lightsaber combat that they themselves called the aggression form. But Ataru was, in fact, consistent both with Jedi beliefs and with Yoda's character. Both Yoda and the Order as a whole recognized that while defense and negotiation should always be the priority, offense was sometimes necessary as a last resort. Yoda believed in that more strongly than most Jedi. When he whipped out his lightsaber, it was truly because he had exhausted all other options. Ataru was a form meant for use in exactly those situations, when violence was the only way for a conflict to be resolved. In such circumstances, it's always best for a fight to end as quickly as possible, and that was exactly what Ataru was meant to accomplish. Its overwhelming force wasn't aimed at destroying the opponent, it was aimed at subduing them as quickly as possible. Ataru was an efficient way to bring an end to violence. In Yoda's case, the aggression and overwhelming force of Ataru had additional benefits that made him more able to resolve conflicts peacefully. Yoda's frenetic, nigh unstoppable take on the Ataru style was a clear demonstration that, while the old master may have seemed small and unthreatening, he was quite powerful and quite capable of coming out on top in a fight. In a sense, it showed that his attempts at negotiation and peaceful resolution were earnest. It would be easier for him to just destroy his opponents, but he actively chose not to, and even a brief demonstration of his prowess with a lightsaber proved it. Ataru allowed Yoda to quickly disarm and subdue an opponent, and it made it much easier for him to find a peaceful resolution with his opponent afterwards. In all but the most dire of circumstances, Yoda's use of the lightsaber was generally a rather literal form of aggressive negotiations. In addition to this, Ataru's strong emphasis on use of the Force meshed well with Yoda's personality and his approach to the Jedi way. For any form of lightsaber combat, Yoda would have to use the Force to augment his physical capabilities, and this reliance, plus centuries of practice, didn't just make Ataru's Force-attuned acrobats a good fit, they also came easily to him, especially due to Yoda's strong connection to the Force. In this way, Yoda was able to offset one of Ataru's greatest weaknesses which was how quickly it drained its users, at least in a sense. Any style of lightsaber combat would require Yoda to drain himself in that way, so it was simply more efficient to use the form that made the most of it. On a philosophical level, Ataru also complemented Yoda's strong attunement to the light side of the Force. It transformed him into a weapon of the Force itself, requiring him to channel the Force through every cell of his being to meet the demands of the style. All these factors combined to not only make Yoda the unrivaled master of Ataru, but also a duelist capable of defeating the galaxy's best. In combat, Yoda was a whirlwind of the Force, pulsing with its light, a raging storm fueled by life and determined to protect it from the darkness. Even Count Dooku, one of the greatest lightsaber duelists to ever live, struggled against him, as described in the novelization of Attack of the Clones. With a sudden burst of sheer power, Master Yoda flew forward, his blade working so mightily that its residual glow outshone even those of both of Anakin's lightsabers when he was at the peak of his dance. Dooku held strong though, his red blade parrying brilliantly, each block backed by the power of the Force, or else Yoda's strikes would have driven right through. Just as he was about to launch a counter though, Yoda was gone, leaping high and turning into a somersault to land right behind Dooku in perfect balance, striking hard. Dooku reversed his grip and stabbed out behind him, intercepting the blow. He let go of his weapon altogether, tossing it just a bit and spun about, catching it before it had even disengaged from Yoda's blade. With a growl of rage, Dooku reached more deeply into the Force, letting it flow through him as if his physical form was a mere conduit for its power. His tempo increased suddenly and dramatically, 3 steps forward, 2 back, perfectly balanced all the while. His fighting style was one based on balance, on the back and forth charges, thrusts, and sudden retreats, and now he came at Yoda with a series of cunning stabs angled left and right. Never could he strike low though, for never did Yoda seem to be on the ground, leaping and spinning, flying all about, parrying each blow and offering cunning counters that had Dooku skipping backward desperately. This was despite the fact that Dooku was not only very familiar with Ataru, but also well versed in its weaknesses and how to exploit them. His own Makashi style was actually something of a counter for Ataru in most cases, as described in the Revenge of the Sith novelization. Kenobi's master had been Qui-Gon Jinn, Dooku's own Padawan. Dooku had fenced Qui-Gon thousands of times, and he knew every weakness of the Ataru form with its ridiculous acrobatics. He drove a series of flashing thrusts toward Kenobi's legs to draw the Jedi Master into a flipping overhead leap so that Dooku could burn through his spine from kidneys to shoulder blades. Against even your average Ataru Master, Dooku's Makashi precision would easily have cut through Ataru's chaotic aggression. That Dooku struggled against Yoda on Geonosis wasn't a testament to the Ataru style, it was a testament to the fact that Yoda had mastered the form so completely that he had eliminated its weaknesses, and not even a master duelist could find any to exploit. Not even Ataru's biggest weaknesses, its vulnerability against single opponents, was a problem for Yoda, as he demonstrated on many occasions during the Clone Wars. On the battlefield, Yoda used Ataru in circumstances where all its weaknesses would be at their worst, and yet he was still a blur of destructive power, all but unstoppable for his separatist foes. Of course, it also helped that Yoda was a master of a great many combat-applicable Force techniques, which he could use far more effectively than any lightsaber. On top of the techniques of Force Valor and Force Speed, which enhanced his ability with Ataru, Yoda was skilled in many forms of telekinesis. In combat, he could use the Force to push or pull opponents, disrupting their balance or even sending them flying. He could hurl crowds out of his way with a Force wave, and during the Battle of Coruscant, he used the Force to crash 2 separatist landing craft into one another. In lightsaber combat, Yoda could also use telekinesis for saber throws, a difficult maneuver that the Jedi Master nonetheless excelled at. When battling a fellow user of the Force, Yoda also knew a number of obscure Force techniques that allowed him to absorb or disrupt the Force attacks of an enemy. He could shield himself in the Force, allowing him to shrug off telekinetic attacks, and he knew rare techniques that allowed him to absorb and even redirect Force lightning, something that once caught even Darth Sidious off guard. Yoda's strength in the Force was such that he could even suppress the Force sensitivity of his opponents, making it more difficult for them to draw on the Force, which was a critical disadvantage in lightsaber duels. Even when he didn't do this, Yoda's strength in the Force far outclassed that of most Darksiders. In the Force, he appeared to be a pulsar of light, burning brightly with the raw power of the light side, which could make his own Force powers difficult for lesser trained Darksiders to resist. Yoda was skilled in the art of Force healing, which he could use to improve his stamina and endurance, or to heal wounds he suffered in battle. He was also one of the few Jedi that had a gift for the art of battle meditation, one of the rarest and most renowned Jedi combat techniques. This power allowed Yoda to turn the tide of entire battles by motivating his allies and stripping his enemies of their will to fight, as well as by enhancing the coordination of allied forces. While this ability was less relevant for individual duels, it could make a major difference in any large fight. But perhaps Yoda's greatest gifts were telepathy and foresight. Foresight was essential to any Jedi in combat. The split-second insights provided to the Force were what allowed Jedi to do things like deflect blaster bolts and defeat most non-Force sensitive enemies. But Yoda's foresight went well beyond this. He had a knack for predicting exactly how combat would go, and this made him incredibly difficult to outmaneuver. This was enhanced by Yoda's skill at telepathy. By reading the thoughts of his opponent, Yoda could easily anticipate and counter their movements. Only those strong enough in the Force to resist, or those who knew special techniques to shield the mind against these sorts of intrusions, could hope to even fend off Yoda in a straight fight. All told, Yoda was one of the most fearsome Jedi combatants of his time, and between his Ataru skill and his strong command of the Force, he was able to take on whole armies at once and come out on top. But there was one more trait, rare even among Jedi, that made Yoda such a fearsome fighter. To understand it, we need to examine the last lightsaber duel Yoda ever fought, his battle with Darth Sidious in the Senate arena. This particular battle was hugely significant for Yoda's character, as well as for the Jedi as a whole. After suffering the loss of nearly the entire Jedi Order, after feeling the deaths of nearly everyone he cared about through the Force, Yoda persisted where others might have despaired, insisting on taking the fight to the Emperor himself in the heart of the galactic capital. While he might not have known the specifics, Yoda would have known that Sidious had already killed several of the Jedi Order's greatest masters, and he would have known that the Dark Lord of the Sith would have been a tough opponent, even for him. Yet, he went after Sidious anyway, and he did so in the manner of a true Jedi. To quote the Revenge of the Sith novelization, Yoda rose. A gesture opened the grating of the vent shaft where he had waited in meditation, revealing the vast conic that was the grand convocation chamber of the Galactic Senate. It was sometimes called the Senate Arena. Today, this nickname would be particularly apt. Yoda stretched blood back into his green flesh. This was his time. 900 years of study and training, of teaching and meditation, all now focused and refined and resolved into this single moment. The sole purpose of his vast span of existence had been to prepare him to enter the heart of night and bring his light against the darkness. He adjusted the angle of his blade against his belt. He draped his robe across his shoulders. With reverence, with gratitude, without fear and without anger, Yoda went forth to war. The novelization also establishes that, for this battle, Yoda wasn't just the greatest combatant of all the Jedi, he fought on behalf of the entire Jedi Order as an avatar of the light side itself. To quote, "Their clash transcended the personal. When new lightning blazed, it wasn't Palpatine burning Yoda with his hate, it was the Lord of all Sith scorching the Master of all Jedi into a smoldering huddle of clothing and green flesh. 1,000 years of hidden Sith exulted in their victory. Your time is over. The Sith rule the galaxy, now and forever." and it was the whole of the Jedi Order that rocketed from its huddle, making of its own body a weapon to blast the Sith to the ground. At an end your rule is, and not short enough it was, I must say. There appeared a blade the color of life. From the shadow of a black wing, a small weapon. A holdout, an easily concealed backup. A tiny bit of treachery expressing the core of Sith mastery, slid into a withered hand and spat a flame-colored blade of its own. When those blades met, it was more than Yoda against Palpatine. More than millennia of Sith against the legions of Jedi. This was the expression of the fundamental conflict of the universe itself. Light against dark. Winner take all. Yoda fought in this battle under enormous pressure. He was one of the last masters of the Jedi, the light's representative in the ultimate battle against the dark, and he had one shot. If he failed to kill Sidious, the Sith would rule the galaxy and the shift in balance would be complete, at least for many years to come. Yet, despite this immense burden, Yoda felt none of it. He maintained Jedi serenity, even as he fought Darth Sidious with all the power of the light side and all the aggression of the Ataru form. All of that makes him a great Jedi, but it wasn't the key to what made him the Jedi Order's greatest fighter. That was a revelation that came much later in the battle, as the Revenge of the Sith novelization again details. There came a turning point in the clash of the light against the dark. It didn't come from a flash of lightning or slash of energy blade, though there were these in plenty. It didn't come from a flying kick or a surgically precise punch, though these were traded too. It came as the battle shifted from the holding office to the Great Chancellor's podium. It came as the hydraulic lift beneath the podium raised it on its tower of Durasteel 100 meters and more, so that it became a laser point of battle, flaring at the focus of the vast emptiness of the Senate arena. It came as the Force and the podium's controls ripped delegation pods free of the curving walls and made of them hammers, battering rams, catapult stones, crashing and crushing against each other in a rolling thunder roar that echoed the Senate's cheers for the galaxy's new emperor. It came when the avatar of light resolved into the lineage of the Jedi, when the lineage of the Jedi refined into one single Jedi. It came when Yoda found himself alone against the dark. In that lightning-speared tornado of feet and fists and blades and bashing machines, his vision finally pierced the darkness that had clouded the Force. Finally, he saw the truth. This truth that he, the Avatar of Light, supreme master of the Jedi Order, the fiercest, most implacable, most devastatingly powerful foe the darkness had ever known, just didn't have it. He'd never had it. He had lost before he started. He had lost before he was born. The Sith had changed. The Sith had grown, had adapted, had invested 1,000 years intensive study into every aspect of not only the Force, but Jedi lore itself, in preparation for exactly this day. The Sith had remade themselves. They had become new, while the Jedi had spent that same millennium training to refight the last war. The new Sith couldn't be destroyed with a lightsaber. They couldn't be burned away by any torch of the Force. The brighter his light, the darker their shadow. How could one win a war against the dark when war itself had become the dark's own weapon? He knew, at that instant, that this insight held the hope of the galaxy. But if he fell here, that hope would die with him. Yoda thought. A problem this is. At the end of this battle, Yoda made a choice that few Jedi would have made, to withdraw and live to fight another day. He recognized that Sidious had won, that the Sith had taken control of the galaxy, and instead of blindly refusing to accept it, instead of dying fruitlessly to preserve his own pride, Yoda conceded, and because he did so, he helped the cause of the Jedi survive. Because of this choice, he survived long enough to pass on the Jedi teachings to Luke Skywalker, who would redeem his father and thus bring about the defeat of the Sith. It was this choice, not his skill with Ataru, not his experience, not even his strong connection to the Force, that made Yoda one of the Jedi Order's greatest fighters. Yoda had the wisdom to understand when he was losing and the humility to accept it. He had the wisdom to see that his whole approach to fighting the dark side, the way the Jedi Order had spent centuries preparing to fight the dark side, was doomed from the beginning. He had the wisdom to see that a new direction was needed, and to understand that he had to concede the present battle in order to win the war in the long run. Most importantly of all, Yoda not only had the wisdom to see these things, but the humility to accept and act on them. The Jedi way was about self-sacrifice, and often this meant that Jedi were called to sacrifice their lives for the sake of others. But sometimes, dying was actually the easy choice. For Jedi especially, could be easier on one's pride. In those cases, the sacrifice was instead choosing to set aside one's pride, accept defeat, and thus survive to help others in the future. That was the nature of the choice Yoda made. It was a painful choice for him to make, not just because it wounded his pride to concede to Sidious, but also because it meant surrendering the galaxy to the Sith and giving up his shot at avenging all the Jedi killed by the Dark Lord's machinations. But Yoda was able to do it anyway. After that battle, Yoda never used a lightsaber in combat again. He went into exile on Dagobah, where he remained for 23 years, patiently awaiting a shift in the tides of the Force. He played one last role in the battle between light and dark, training Luke Skywalker as a Jedi before dying. This ended up being more important to the defeat of the Sith than any other choice Yoda had ever made, and it never would have happened had Yoda not withdrawn on that faithful day. In the end, it wasn't Yoda's combat skill that won the battle against the dark side. As he himself had realized, the war itself was a weapon of the dark side, and the Sith could no longer be defeated through it. It was Yoda's wisdom, passed on to Luke Skywalker, that won the day. It was the Jedi teachings, the unconditional compassion and mercy of the light side, that brought down Darth Sidious in the end. It took a while, but Yoda did win his battle with the Dark Lord eventually. More important than that, however, was how he won it. As a Jedi Master, not as a warrior. So, that was our look at Yoda, one of the greatest champions of the Jedi Order, and what truly made him the Order's most fearsome combatant. But what do you think? What's your favorite Yoda moment from the films or the expanded universe? Let us know all that and more in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.